Stephanie, a real pleasure to have you on the show. I have a lot of questions that I want to ask you. Obviously, I think your career has spanned, like been very focused on science and research. I'd be curious as to like how did you first get interested in wanting to study pain? Like, is there anything that like as from early on that made you interested in the subject?
Honestly, when I was an undergraduate, I took a class at McGill called something like ion channels, and basically the teacher who ended up being my PhD supervisor was talking about pain, and I had never really thought about the sense of touch, pain, how we sense the external environment physically, and I was kind of puzzled by how many gaps in the knowledge there were. And I was just very interested in the research. I had a meeting with that prof. His name's Reza Sharif Naini, and I ended up joining his lab to become an undergraduate research assistant. And I started working on the project that would ultimately become my PhD. I've always been really interested in research and like sort of tinkering and trying to figure things out. And research is kind of like the best place to foster that. So I just fell in love with the subject matter, fell in love with the daily life of doing experiments, testing hypotheses, and things like that. And I just sort of never left.
Yep, science, how stuff is made, right? Like the headline after like a 2-year pandemic where people are like, "Oh, I don't believe in science." I'm definitely going off track there. I want to talk about your PG thesis, but maybe at a more macro question, right? You mentioned pain, then it's something that every human on Earth lives with, right? And you mentioned it's not understood. So, like, how would you gauge? I don't know if it's a percentage or a sliding scale of like our current knowledge of pain, what it's caused, how we can solve it. Yeah, I'd be curious to like where are we today in terms of like unlocking this, understanding this.
Well, there is some basic knowledge of course, how pain works. We understand how nerves in our skin interpret information about touch, about pain, how we somewhat understand how those things are encoded differently in being transmitted to the brain. But of course, the solutions for pain are few and far between. That's why we have the opioid crisis. That's why so many people struggle with chronic pain with absolutely no solutions. Like I think the most recent stats are something like 20% of Canadians suffer from chronic pain, and the lines of defenses and the drugs that they're offered to treat their pain haven't changed in the past 20 years. There have been really no therapeutic advances. So we have an understanding of what pain is, I guess, in a way, but we don't really understand how to block it,
Yeah.
let's say.
Do you think there's a path for us to eliminate things like chronic pain? Like, I don't know if it'd be ideal, maybe eliminating pain altogether. That it's like like do we become Superman? But I think there is probably a good thing about humans feeling pain. Like, hey, if you put your hand on the fire, is usually a signal to not do that. But I imagine for things that are chronic, that like you said, plague a lot of people, I imagine hopefully should be a path to resolving this. At least I hope.
There definitely should be. There are a lot of different projects that are going on of people trying to figure out, can we use gene therapy to treat pain? This like traditional view in treating pain of using opiates or something to just numb the pain at the level of the brain or the spinal cord has worked for a certain amount of time. But, there's this concept that, especially that sort of is what I'm interested in and is something that we pursue with StingMaster is blocking pain at its source, blocking pain at the nerve endings, not using medications that sort of interact with your brain or your spinal cord to treat pain, because that's not really treating pain at its source. But yeah, definitely feeling pain is important. It's an evolutionary process that most living things experience because you need to feel pain to know where the limit is for self-preservation. But when it transitions to chronicity, like when there's pain without having like a reason for it, without having any injury anymore, that's when it becomes a huge issue. And that's really where treatment options are few and far between, because at the chronic pain level, there are so many different kinds of pain. There's cancer pain that comes from different chemotherapy drugs. There's nerve pain, fibromyalgia, all these different categories of pain that have different molecular underpinnings that are all in their own ways not quite understood.
Yeah, and
So
like my dad suffers from fibromyalgia, and it's just temporary relief, right? Like you said, with medication. He's giving me a question from left field. Maybe just like I said, this podcast is like for me to a way to learn. But I've heard, and maybe this is an urban myth, that the most painful natural event for a human is being born. It's like the act of being born is like apparently very, very painful. Like, I'm not sure if you have any idea, or from like, just tell me to shut up.
No, I mean, I've never heard that. But what's interesting, actually, so I was at a conference last week, the Canadian Pain Society conference. And one of the speakers that was like the keynote speaker is this woman named Mariah Fitzgerald, who's a very famous pain scientist from the UK. And she studies pediatric pain. And actually, her, like, some groundbreaking research that's come out of her lab has shown that it seems that like infants don't experience pain like older children. The parts of your brain that get activated in painful situations are actually not quite as refined. So we don't know if that means, babies feel less pain or babies feel more pain, or what that means for the sensory experience, but it's different from like our experience of pain because it gets refined over time with experience and with like a variety of painful situations. So it's possible, but yeah, I'm not sure.
Well, yeah, it's just
Hard to
like
ask.
it goes back to, I think, our point from before. Just so much of it is just not understood right now. What led you to wanting to study lionfish specifically, and we'll kind of like segue into like your PhD.
Sure. So when I was a kid, my parents had a place in Nassau in the Bahamas, and we would go multiple times a year to the Bahamas. And I kind of fell in love with the ocean. We would go snorkeling all the time. We would go to this one dive center, and they would have like these organized sort of snorkeling trips to different reefs. And I really loved looking at the different fish and learning about the fish and the environment and the like coral reef dynamics and things like that. So that's always been an interest of mine. And when I joined Reza's lab, the pain scientist I mentioned, he sort of pitched a few projects to me, and one of them was this project studying lionfish venom. And lionfish are an incredibly invasive species. They're endemic to the Indo-Pacific, but they've become incredibly invasive in the Caribbean, the Gulf of Mexico, and even the Mediterranean now. And they're a huge problem because they basically eat all fish that are smaller than them. So they decimate reef juvenile populations, and they're a real problem for biodiversity. And I became familiar with that problem as a kid. Like, I saw the invasion happen. They invaded the Caribbean in the 90s. And over the course of the years, I would see more and more lionfish. And I don't know if you've seen a picture of a lionfish, but they're a beautiful fish. So I just thought, oh, there's this cool fish like that I started seeing when we're snorkeling. And I sort of learned that they were an issue back then. But so Reza told me, they produce this excruciatingly painful sting, and nobody knows why. No one knows what's in the venom, how it interacts with the nervous system, how it's evolved to just cause this excruciating pain. And I'm interested in finding out. This can be your project if you join my lab. So that summer, I was still an undergrad when that happened. And that summer, I started working on this project, just sort of understanding what kind of pain lionfish venom causes. And we collaborated with this other lab at University of Toronto, Steve Prescott's lab. And one of his postdocs found that somehow lionfish venom targets like one type of nerve ending in your skin to cause pain, which is a pretty puzzling finding from a pain point of view, that like a venom is so specifically evolved to cause pain. So it ended up becoming my PhD project, understanding how lionfish venom causes so much pain. And over the following years, we sort of figured out the molecular mechanism the venom takes to extort pain on its victims. And in figuring that out, we actually also found all these ways to block it. So we found in the lab, we use these pharmaceutical compounds that are like research grade, not for human use. But I was going to all these different conferences that have to do with lionfish. And because they're invasive, people hunt them, especially in Florida and things like that. And people get stung after they take them off. They have to spear them because they don't bite on a line. So people get stung by lionfish when they pull them off their spears, and they suffer from this excruciating pain. So we thought, like, what if we could formulate a treatment for lionfish stings in a cream? And this was totally aside from my PhD work. And we actually found that the molecules we used that were research grade there were other molecules that were similar to them that occurred naturally in different barks and root extract. So we actually turned to rhubarb extract for this like ingredient that blocks the pain from lionfish stings. And through a bunch of trial and error, we formulated StingMaster with a bunch of other ingredients that work in concert with the molecules that are in rhubarb extract to block the pain from lionfish stings. And we tested it so many times in the lab, on ourselves, on different people who get stung by lionfish. to get input. So it was kind of like a very natural progression from, I knew about lionfish for my whole life, and then going into research, studying their venom, and just sort of going into this direction with StingMaster.
Interesting. So then maybe if you could double click a bit deeper on your on the solution, like how exactly does your ointment then prevent pain?
Right. So when you feel pain from anything, like let's say if a person normally gets stung by a lionfish, what happens is that they get punctured, their skin gets punctured by these spines that are on the back of the fish. They're very long and they're made of cartilage, so it's easy to get punctured by them. And the venom that's contained in these spines sort of flows into you. The venom itself is a cocktail of hundreds of different proteins that each have their own jobs. And together they exert the final product of a lionfish sting, which is excruciating pain, swelling, redness. Some people have blistering, like all these different things that happen to, let's say, your hand if you get stung. So what we do is that the molecules that are in rhubarb extract, they actually block the specific protein on the surface of your nerve endings that get activated by one or a group of toxins that are specifically there to cause pain. We also have other molecules in the cream that are anti-inflammatory that help reduce the swelling. There's another molecule that helps break down the toxin once it's in sort of your skin. It helps destabilize the protein in the toxin. And then there's also lidocaine, just so that we can make the claim that it treats pain. So with OTCs, you have to use products or ingredients that are pre-approved as your active ingredient. So we chose lidocaine. But really, lidocaine does very little for lionfish stings. The pain is way, way, way too high for lidocaine to help very much. But by preventing the activation of the nerve ending, what happens is that you prevent the nerve ending from even sensing excruciating pain. So instead of a pain signal being sent to your brain, it's just, it's a brief discomfort for sure. But it's not nearly as bad as it is when people normally get stung by lionfish. So when someone gets stung by a lionfish, they can expect to be in pain for hours, like 10 on 10 of pain. It's really some of the most painful feelings. Like it feels like you're being stabbed and someone's wiggling a knife in your hand. And it lasts for, depending on the person, 1 hour to hours, like on end, sometimes days. And usually the limb that's been stung is extremely sore for multiple days, if not weeks afterwards. So the numbing of that initial pain actually helps reduce the long-term pain with lionfish stings, and it just sort of solves the problem of being stung by a lionfish. Through sending this product out to a lot of different people now, and like tens of thousands of people have StingMaster in their hands now, we're learning that it actually works on a really broad variety of stings. So it works really well for jellyfish stings and less severe like ocean stings like sea lice and fire coral. It also works on Portuguese man-o'-war, which are like this crazy looking jellyfish that causes a lot of pain. And we think it's really just blocking this activation of the nerve endings through the molecules we use in rhubarb extract that provides this new avenue for relief for these stings.
When did you realize, it's a fascinating story. When did you realize that you had something that works, and then B is like, oh shit, I need to commercialize this? Like you had the compulsion of like, I have no choice, but this needs to become a business.
The well, when we realized it worked, honestly, it was more just like I was analyzing the data from mice whose paws had been injected with lionfish venom and realizing that they lick their paws significantly less if I just block one part of their nervous system. And talking to so many people who've been stung by lionfish really is what motivated us to produce any kind of treatment. So it sounds like such a foreign land to me, or it sounded like such a foreign land to me, but in Florida, the lionfish are such a huge problem that like the government sponsors these tournaments for hunting lionfish where tens of thousands of lionfish are hunted in a weekend and removed from the waters. Like it is a pretty popular thing to do, like on the Gulf of Mexico and in the Caribbean as well. And it's very important for reef biodiversity is there. So speaking to people who participate in these events and who've been stung by like lionfish 50 times, saying like, you need to create a solution, was sort of what motivated us at first. But when we realized that this had the potential to work on basically every aquatic sting, and this could be a treatment for, almost like an afterbite for the sea, we realized, okay, we really should commercialize this. And that's when we turned to District 3. We actually had 3 product ideas when we came to D3. We thought, first of all, the pain causing toxins in the venom, we could modify their structures to instead making them block pain because they already have evolved to be so specific to binding to nerve endings. Then we thought that maybe we could make a cream that contained lionfish venom at a low dose, and that would treat pain. I don't know if you've ever heard of capsaicin cream, but capsaicin is the ingredient that causes pain in chili peppers. And capsaicin cream, which is a low dose of capsaicin, actually desensitizes your nerve endings so you feel less pain by feeling a little bit of pain, kind of like icy hot patches. And then the last idea was we make a blocker for lionfish stings that works broadly for aquatic stings. And it ended up being, in a way, the low-hanging fruit, but also the most obvious solution for immediate sales. And we actually went from lab to market in 1 year. So we had a general idea of what a product could look like in the fall of 2019. We joined District 3's acceleration program, and we did all of their sort of workshops and learned about what skills we needed to acquire in order to commercialize this. And then very quickly things happened. We had a manufacturer, we had a distributor, we were ready to start selling in June 2020. And then obviously the pandemic happened and all of our contracts became canceled because of, act of God, pandemic. Every manufacturer that made anything wanted to make hand sanitizer. So we sort of went back to the drawing board. But yeah, it was all this to say, we realized we had commercial potential when we started the acceleration program. And basically one of the hallmarks of District 3's acceleration program is that they force you to do 100 interviews in 10 weeks, where you talk to 100 potential customers and you do these discovery interviews where you realize what the problem is and you check to see sort of how your solution fits in there and how you can shape your solution to actually solve the problem your customers are experiencing. And we realized this product has legs. I was preparing slides. I'm giving a presentation later today at a graduate career day, and people really did laugh at us. I always remind people, now people look to me and say, "Isn't this kind of niche?" And I get that it's not obvious as a product, but really at the beginning of our journey, people thought this was ridiculous. They were like, "Who cares about lionfish? Who cares about stings? We're in Canada." But we realized by speaking to our potential customers, we have a pretty broad customer base.
Yeah, I like that aspect of hey, speak to potential customers and validate it, and then what people's opinions kind of matter a lot less, right? Oh, it's cold here or whatever. It's well, like you said, you had the firsthand experience going back to your summers and your time in the Bahamas of seeing it happen, right? So that's interesting. Maybe gives us a sense of scale of today. Like you mentioned, thousands of people are using it. So maybe any numbers you can share publicly.
Sure. So at this point, so we once everything got canceled in summer of 2020, we ended up getting a new manufacturer. Our new launch date was actually November 2020. So really not the most ideal time to launch a summery product is the end of the fall, especially in 2020, but it still worked out. At this point now, we have a distributor who distributes to dive shops in the United States quite broadly. So we're in really a broad variety of states. There are dive shops in Milwaukee that have StingMaster on their countertops. And so we have a diving industry distributor there. We're also distributed in Indonesia to a variety of different dive shops and charters. So charter boats that take people out diving. And it's a major component of their first aid kit. And we're also starting to sort of gain traction or trying to gain traction in Mexico and more towards South America, where there are also, people who go to the beach. But our next sort of frontier that we're trying to enter is really pharmacies. So we've really been involved in the diving community until now. So we sponsor lots of spearfishing events. We attend diving industry trade shows. So last weekend I was at a lionfish spearfishing event, and my co-founder Reza, who's my PhD supervisor, also he was in California at a diving retail trade show. In November, we go to this huge trade show with our distributor. So we've really been in the diving industry, and we're starting to realize yes, there are all these applications for divers to have this in their first aid kit, but this is also something that should be in every beach bag. So we're trying to get into pharmacies now, and perhaps, if possible, one day bigger box stores, to really make this a more ubiquitous product. So, like I mentioned, we're at sort of tens of thousands of people who have StingMaster in their hands, but this can, I think, certainly grow a lot bigger with time.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing. And so how big? Maybe two-part question is like the first one would be is how big do you see the opportunity beyond just Lionfish? You mentioned it before, where there's more applicability, but maybe specific to how you size the market today. Like it seems like you're already like going after a global footprint immediately, right? Like water. So
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, people always ask me, well, how many people get stung by lionfish every year? And it's a really hard number to give because not everyone reports it. So I prefer actually to go after the number of people that are stung by jellyfish every year. And there are actually 150 million people worldwide that are estimated to experience a jellyfish sting every year. There's Australia, there's Asia, there's even like coasts of Africa, the Mediterranean, the Caribbean, like there are jellyfish everywhere that are stinging. And there is really no good solution. There's urine, vinegar, meat tenderizer. Those are the three main things. And all of them take advantage of ammonia in a way. Urine has the lowest concentration of it, ironically. Vinegar has ammonia, and the meat tenderizer also sort of has ammonia that helps reduce the inflammation and like sort of reduce the activity of a jellyfish sting. But all of these solutions are really average. You either smell like a salad or you're rubbing something that feels like sand into a fresh jellyfish sting. So they're not these great instant pain relief solutions. And StingMaster is like, if you get stung by a jellyfish and you apply StingMaster, you don't feel that jellyfish sting within a minute. And I think that once people start to realize that it actually works, and that this is a far easier solution to have with you if you get stung by a jellyfish, or this is a worthwhile solution to have, then it will take off a lot more. One of our main issues really is people believing that it works. So especially for lionfish stings, people are just like, well, I've been stung by a lionfish. I'm like, it's excruciatingly painful. There's no way a cream can help with that. So as soon as I think we continue to get the word out about the product and the fact that it's not just like a product that someone created that might work, like there are years of research behind this and like detailed molecular level research about pain that backs StingMaster. I think that maybe those 150 million people that get stung by jellyfish will be more likely to turn to StingMaster as a solution.
yeah. And what about future use cases, right? You mentioned like you've solved something very specific using, with the research that you conducted. Do you think there's applicability beyond just the lionfish, obviously, but also other kinds of pain reduction?
For sure. And that's honestly something we're looking into now, trying to see, perhaps what other types of stings StingMaster could be applicable for, but also maybe what other types of conditions StingMaster can help with, different maybe pain situations. We're looking into that now.
Yeah, maybe an esoteric question. Like, what have you? Because you mentioned before we started recording, you never had like envisioned going into business or like had any interest. Have you learned anything about yourself in this journey of like, hey, researching something and then like having something that works that people are like, hey, here's my money. Like, maybe any personal thoughts on this journey so far?
I definitely think this journey has changed me a lot. Like one thing I always mention, especially when I talk to people who are in science who want to go into business, I have never been, I don't know if this is the proper word to use in this case, but I've never been a schmoozer. I'm not great in social situations where I don't already know people. Like I'm a very normal person. That's not to say I'm that awkward, but reaching out to 100 strangers and asking them for their opinion on a product or their story of what happens when they get stung by a lionfish and talking to so many different people was definitely something that was pretty new for me. I've never thought about a customer before, like I've never thought about business or revenues or anything like that. So I think the first way that I was changed a lot by this journey was just being more comfortable going out, talking to people about this product and valuing their opinion and their experience to shape how I develop a product. But also, I think I've definitely learned a lot about money, business, how to manage people in different relationships and dealing with a broad variety of different personalities. Like I'd argue that there are a lot more, in science, there are of course different personalities, but I think that everyone's pretty similar. And as soon as you step out into that and you talk to salespeople, you talk to people in manufacturing, you talk to people in distribution, like everyone has different motivations. And I think that having this experience has really taught me to try to think of like, okay, what is motivating this person? And like, how can I connect with this person and have their motivations align with mine? And I think that that's been a really valuable lesson for me. It's definitely been extremely unreal to, have developed something in the lab and have people say even the word StingMaster. It's still like surreal to me, or the fact that people use it. Last weekend at this event in Florida, the on the second day of the event, there's like all these divers that sort of come back from having hunted lionfish, and within the first 2 hours of the event, I had like 15 people come up to me and tell me how much they love StingMaster and how they swear by it. They're like, it's always in my first aid kit. As soon as anyone gets stung by anything, we slap on some StingMaster. Like, congratulations. And that is still doesn't feel real, because I think it's still a little early for me to acknowledge that. But that's been maybe my favorite part.
That's wild. That's wild. I love that story. I love that story. You, like you said, maybe it feels still a bit early, but have you, do you ever think about maybe a bigger ambition for like, today in terms of like, well, you mentioned the size of the impact and the positive contribution to humanity this thing can do. Have you ever thought of like, hey, how big can this get and how big you want to take it personally?
For sure. I mean, I'm still in my PhD. I'm at the end of my fourth year now, and I hope to graduate in 2 years. And I do want to finish my PhD. I don't want to leave early, because I'd be lying if I say I hadn't thought about that at all. But one thing that I've sort of learned in this journey, because like I was mentioning earlier, it's really rare to like treat someone's pain, like for real. It's rare to do something where someone feels less pain afterwards and they can tell you about it. Especially as a basic scientist, like I work with mice, I work with cells. They don't tell me how they feel. I just gauge how they're feeling based on different characteristics. So by seeing people feel pain relief from StingMaster, of course it inspires me to want to treat every pain and find a way to cure everyone's pain somehow. I don't know if necessarily I'm the person to like drive every pain treatment or drive those things, but I would love to have StingMaster become bigger. I would love to come out with different versions of StingMaster that treat different kinds of stings, or different versions of our formula that can be applied to different conditions. And I think what's going to bring StingMaster really to the next level is, I think, partnerships with a lot like larger companies that have the capacity to distribute and have, the capital to push a really big product like this. It is a consumer good. So, I went into this thinking this was going to be like a biotech or a healthcare product. And all it is at this point is really a consumer good and trying to have as broad of a retail reach as possible. So we sell via e-commerce from Shopify or directly to shops. And I think that what's going to bring us to the next level is having significantly broader distribution, the capacity to have different like sizes of our containers, maybe single use sizing. And I didn't mention this earlier, but we haven't actually raised any capital as a startup. We've only used grants, our initial investments from myself and Reza, and bootstrapping. So I think in order to grow this, we will need, some sort of an injection of some sort that's going to make this explode, because I think it can.
Yeah, I think anyone listening, any people in the venture capital or investment space, like, hey, here's a pretty good business opportunity. I think going back to a point you said, I think my one critique of, let's say, our education system is that if you're doing a PhD and because of this PhD you create a product that people use, you should get like an automatic like a degree. It should be like, okay, you're done. You won your PhD. It's like my one wish is that you accelerate your PhD to, because a lot of people waiting to get their pain cured. So it's like spend less time on the PhD. It's like more time building this, because it sounds like you're having a positive impact to the world, Stephanie. And I think this may be a great way to kind of end the conversation. Final question would be, if people want to learn more about what you're doing, what's the best way to connect?
So they can check out our website, www.stingmaster.com, or they can add me on LinkedIn. My full name is Stephanie Mouchbahani-Constance, or even at, check me out on Twitter at Stephanie Mouche, and I'm happy to connect and chat. I love talking about science, about StingMaster, and where this can go. So any conversations are always welcome.
Stephanie, I learned a ton. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks.